Well, it's a great place to be on a time when I think the humidity is 90% now and the temperature is rising from yesterday. So I'm thinking about going into the second session a little bit in order to remain here in the cool, but we'll see if the other speaker will yield. What I want to bring to you today is maybe a little bit different than the typical things that you see promoted now. Not that those typical things being promoted in a time when we're in some danger of profit erosion, coming in and out of some pretty devastating times. We see the typical lists of things to do, all of which make a lot of sense, like checking your feeders and making sure people are following the right standard operating procedures and so on. But I want to share with you today some of the work I've been doing in the last couple of years, which really has its birth from people like Dr. John Dean, who I'm sure you've heard of and have heard him speak at the University of Minnesota, veterinarian, who's been working on these concepts of variation. And he looks at it primarily by looking at what we do as pig producers from the quality literature. So those concepts have been around for a while, and what I've tried to do in the last couple of years is to look at the impact of variation on profits. And we're at the beginning of a phase now where I think research is going to begin to drive us toward some of the key things we're doing now, which actually increase what I'm going to call unintentional output. If you think about it, when you put together all of the money it takes to invest and run a modern swine operation, very few producers that I work with think about the ideal outcome of that. Like, what did you put all that money in place for? What did you organize this operation, hire these people, and use the sweat of your brow to, what is the endpoint that you're trying to actually accomplish? And I think if we look at that, I want to just simplify it into about four things. When we produce a pig to go out into the marketplace, the ideal is that it actually makes it through our production process and winds up being sold. So if it winds up being a mortality or something like that, it's not part of our ideal outcome. Pretty simple. The second thing is one that I think, have made a lot of mistakes on because it hasn't really been emphasized. And that is, are we selling our pigs at the profit maximizing weight? Now, the typical way that that's calculated, which we're going to look at in just a few minutes, I think has led the industry to overestimate what the ideal marketing weight for their pigs actually is. We've been so focused really since the 90s when a lot of technology came in on just simple production. And for a long time, just more throughput generally meant more profitability. But we're really at a time in the industry now where two things are changing that. One is many farms, if not most farms, have pretty much captured most of the economies of scale and size, and they don't always execute the throughput issue effectively, but the focus on pigs per sow per year and things like pigs weaned per crate per year, and sayings like what really matters is pigs out the door, is all focused on simple production principles rather than on profitability. Because it was just assumed, I think, and probably rightly so at the beginning, that more production generally meant more efficient use of our resources and therefore more profits. The second thing that impinges on that is the high cost of our inputs. With $6 corn and $300+ bean meal, the message to you from an economic point of view is you can no longer have the same amount of those inputs that you had the year before unless you create some more value with them. Because other people want them, other people are bidding them away. It's like you went to the local auction, equipment auction, and you spied out a piece of equipment you wanted a week before the auction happened, and you're hoping nobody else comes to bid and you'll get it at a good price. Well, when 50 people come and they all want it, unless you can create a lot of value with it, you're going to drop out of the bidding early and not take as much. So high cost of inputs and basically this movement beyond simple pigs out the door, pounds out the door, is leading us to take a little closer look at what is the profit maximizing weight? And I think you'll really be surprised at some of the things that you can discover with that when you take a little deeper look at it. Then not just the weight issue, which is number 2, but we want to sell them at the right weight with at least no discount for quality. The typical packer matrix in the United States and really all over Europe and Brazil and in fact all over the world that I travel and work, even though in some places they say, well, no, they don't really buy them like this. They just want pigs. But as soon as you say, well, is a 500 kilogram pig okay? They say, well, no, of course not. How about 400? No, 300. And you can kind of ferret it out. But most of our packing grids pay on trying to get the ideal weight that the packer wants, and the lean percent is the typical other measure of quality, although some add a couple of other things. And then, of course, we want to do the first 3 at the least cost possible. Now, we don't want to start at the bottom and work our way up, right? Which is a lot of the focus that I think people make that causes mistakes and problems. We assume these things are sort of taken care of, and then we say, how can I cut cost? And what I find and try to remind producers of that I work with is every expense is tied to a revenue at some point. Now, it may be tied to a revenue that's realized 2 or 3 months or 4 months down the line, but when you pull out a cost, know that revenue at some point will be affected, typically. And so it's very important not just to assume these things are taken care of, so now cut costs. So we find even some of the largest companies in the United States, for instance, I remember after 98 and the debacle that we had in prices there, they were doing things like taking everybody's cell phone away because they got to get the cell phone bill down. And if it's a multi-state operation, nobody can fly, you have to drive. So imagine sending a key manager in a car without a cell phone on an 8-hour trip. You can pretty easily see situations where saving $150 a month on a cell phone bill maybe costs hundreds of thousands of dollars because he really isn't available. So we don't start with least cost, but we want to make sure that we wind up, after we do the other things, they're at least cost. So how well do we do? And even though producers, many of them that I work with, kind of balk at the idea of starting with the ideal, I like to start there because it shows the opportunity. Of course, we can't ever capture the full opportunity that's available, but it shows that full opportunity, and we can then think about how we can capture some fraction of it. If you think about 180 pigs going on a truck that are all alive and they're all going to the market and you're going to sell them, what that generally means, if you have a 4% death loss in wean to finish and say a 13.5 pre-weaning mortality, it means that to sell 180, we had to have 188 that went into the wean to finish building, and it means that we had to have 217 born alive. So you can see already as a process which creates pork, we start with 217 animals which come into our care and wind up, if we have reasonably good mortality results, with 180 to sell. So already we're the intention of what we're doing, that is to produce pigs which all make us money, which we save them all and so forth, are in a typical farm with reasonably good performance. We're already kind of behind the 8 ball. So now we have, let's say, this 180 to sell. And the question is, what are they like? How well do they stack up to being the ideal pig? So if we have these 180 to sell, do we have 180 ideal outcomes? And what is the ideal outcome now that we actually got them to the marketplace and ready to be evaluated? I think it's emblematic of our industry if you think about it, and I know you'll think about this in sort of practical terms. On most farms, the only place where an individual pig is actually individually weighed, measured, and judged for its quality is when? When it's slaughtered, right? So here we produce thousands of pigs on many of our farms, and nowhere do we individually assess how we're doing. We rely on averages, right? When you look at a feed efficiency and an average daily gain calculation coming out of a closeout, you're really looking at the average performance of all the pigs in that building. We have a saying in Missouri that may be particularly good on this day. You can have your head in the freezer and your rear end in the oven and have a nice average temperature. Right? So, in fact, what we know going on in that 1,000-head finisher, for instance, that has this average feed efficiency of X and ADG of Y, which our records deliver, is a lot of feed efficiencies which are very poor, and a lot of average daily gains which are very, very good, and many that are very poor, but we're looking at them as an average. So we want to get beyond that a little bit, the same way the packer does, because remember, at the end of this process, somebody is taking every one of your pigs and saying, all right, how well did you do? Because I'm paying for them, and I'm not going to pay for anything but what I want. So we have this one place where that happens. All right. One thing we know, really from biology, and it's a built-in part of biology, is that pigs grow at different rates. Now, I'm not a veterinarian, but I could talk to Dr. Fangman and others, which I've done, and I found out this interesting sort of thing that even in the uterus, when pigs attach to the uterus, you would think if they were a nice controlled process, they would all attach equally spaced apart in the uterus so they could all get the same nutrition and space and so on. But in fact, you may have clumping of 2 or 3 pigs that attach to the wall of the uterus very close together, and the middle one may get squeezed. And we observe that in birth weight differences. So right when they come out, they're now different in terms of their viability, their weight, their so on. And you know that the biggest pig and the first ones out get the first shot at colostrum. They get the best places to eat. That gives them a boost on growth, a boost on immunity, and then they continue that process. They crowd other pigs out of the feeder spaces. They rush for the best spots to lay down and so on. And the other laggards then begin to get more and more disadvantaged. So we know in the wean to finish process, and it really starts in utero, as we keep pigs on the farm longer and longer, the variation begins to grow, even if they're all from the exact same genetics and all from the same boar. Now, when that happens, the practical implication of that, when we get at the end of the finishing process, is we put them in on a certain day. When we come to take them out, they're not all ready, right? So the typical practice in the United States, but which, by the way, is very different in Canada and in Europe, is we send somebody in with a marking pencil, and they try to figure out the 180 biggest ones to go in the first load. Now, even those 180 that they take out to put on the truck are not all the same weight. They come out as a distribution of weights. Think of this sort of the bell-shaped curve. Then we wait a few days and pick the second cut. Then the third cut, and then, because U.S. producers never found an empty space that they could fall in love with, people start getting nervous, right? I've got 60% of the pigs out of this building. I've got all this empty space. Well, the rest of them got to go. So then we do the dump of the building, right? So 1, 2, 3 cuts, then a dump. Now, the problem with that is, which is kind of interesting, is most producers do not follow what the results are if that happens. And there's some couple very good reasons for that. The impact of that is often hidden from producers because of the way we get the data from the packing plant and because of the way we take a look at it. For instance, most producers that I know, no matter how large they are, look at individual kill sheets. They don't take the 5 or 6 kill sheets maybe that came from this building, the 2, 3, the first cut, second cut, third cut, and dump kill sheets, and line them all up and look at them together as what happened in this building in this process that I have created here. And so by looking at only individual kill sheets, first of all, the distribution of pigs which come out of that building looks more narrow than it really is. Because any one load coming out of the building typically is not going to be as variable as all of the loads which come out of that process. Now multiply that across buildings and across sites, And we have a lot of variance information that misses the eyeballs and the examination of typical producers. And you know exactly how you are if you're a producer, which is exactly the same way I am because it's human nature. If I come to your farm and ask you, give me a typical kill sheet so I can take a look at it, what are you going to send in front of me? About the best one you can think of from last week, right? Where all of them, where there's practically no sort loss and everything is wonderful and all that. But remember, I'm from Missouri, and I know those pigs, some of them have had their head in the freezer and their rear end in the oven. And so what I want to see is more data and more information. And that's what I go about taking a look at. And when you take a look at it, you get some very interesting observations. Remember the typical metrics we look at. A producer will look at the average weight sold on the kill sheet, the sort loss, too high, why did they wait too long? Then they'll look at the FE and the ADGs. And the most recent one that's fairly good, or the most recent 10% that are fairly good, become the one that I kind of tout as what my performance is. Do we know really what is the average weight of first cuts typically versus the dump load? How many people can really tell me what is the feed efficiency for first cuts versus the building? Well, you really can't because there's no way to calculate the feed efficiency unless you have special equipment until all the animals are out. So we're forced to kind of spread the results over a wide variety. I have a former student from Iowa State in the room who's a very successful pig producer who's holding a beer for me just in case I get into trouble. He's got some anesthesia for me up there. But he knows when I was at Iowa State teaching, when I first got there, maybe that predates him a little bit, we had to have class evaluations. So students turned in evaluations at the end of the year. And when I first got there as a junior faculty member, I did the labs for the worst professor in Iowa State's history in economics. He was the driest, boringest lecture. And it wasn't that I was so wonderful, at least back then, but by his standards, I looked like a star pupil. So when it came time to do the evaluations and to turn them into the dean, he took all of ours, mine and his, and averaged them and turned in the average result. Whereas you see everybody else, the individual instructors turned in their individual evaluations. And that's kind of what happens here, in a sense, in our feed barns. We're seeing really not the worst pigs or the best pigs, we're seeing this average. And it's hiding a lot of problems that need to be addressed but don't come onto our radar screen. So I would ask you, what is the typical distribution of marketings from a barn? And we can take a look at it one step up from the individual pig now to, say, a barn. From data that I've taken a look at, I'm going to show you a typical distribution of marketings from a barn, really from a farm. And then, just so we're not dealing with hundreds of thousands of observations, I'm going to say, all right, here's a representative 180 pig load that's the same distribution that the farm markets in a year. Now remember, any individual load could be better than this, worse than this, and so on. But we're going to extrapolate from what the farm offers out in a year from all of its efforts to an individual load just so that we can handle kind of the calculations here. Well, I like to ask producers, what is the distribution of pig weights that I sell in a year? And what is the average weight that I choose to market at? Now, most people can't answer the first question because they've never systematically looked at it. And to tell you the truth, the thing that you really need to take a look at this is individual animal carcass information from your packer. Now, not all packers provide that, or some provide it, but only if they're asked. So most people just accept kill sheets. Now, kill sheets don't serve our purpose very well as we move into this next era of improving things on the farm. I call them receipts. They're not data that you can work with. And the reason is, a typical kill sheet will show you the number of animals that were marketed in a range and give you the total weight. So if I want to know what were the weights of the animals in that range, the only thing I can do is calculate the average, right? there may have been, all these pigs, 40 pigs were between 250 and 285 pounds. And here was their total weight. That tells me nothing about how they were dispersed in that range, right? So it's hiding, again, in a sense, the truth of what's happening in that average. So I'm trying to get producers to begin to ask for individual carcass information, because then you can begin to create the distribution and understand the variance that you're sending to market rather than getting receipts from the packer. What is the average weight that I choose to market? Well, the typical way that people choose the weight that they market is one of two ways. They look at kill sheets over time, and they'll notice kind of a weight where if it starts to get over that, they get lots of sort loss. So then by intuition, they kind of back up from there. Or they'll do a single pig calculation. All right? And I'm going to show you what the fundamental error is involved if you do a single pig calculation and then apply it to the distribution that you're actually selling. This is a typical distribution taken from actual data of marketings from a farm. What we mean by that is the average weight of 275 pounds and the standard deviation 24.6. Now, I have seen some as low as 19 on the standard deviation and 18. That would make the distribution more narrow. But if you really account for every pig, you know, the ones that didn't do so well along with the better ones, it's not uncommon to have this kind of a distribution. What this says is 5% of the pigs were above 315, 5% of the pigs in this distribution are below 234. And the rest of them are in here. The height of the histogram tells you basically the percentage of pigs that were marketed at that weight. Now, just as a little bit of an aside, if you went into the finishing barn and actually weighed pigs before you marketed them, weighed every pig in the barn, they wouldn't have this nice normal shaped distribution. It's actually a distribution that looks more like this. It has a long beginning tail and then drops off. And the reason for that is the slow-growing pigs, the dump loads, are still in there. When you put human interaction into there to select pigs around a target weight, you typically generate a more normal distribution of actual sales because somebody is targeting a certain weight and they're off a little bit high, off a little bit low, and they tend in a stable situation to develop this more sort of normalized distribution. Okay, if I were to put a scatter diagram of those 180 pigs up from that distribution, this is what they typically look like with respect to lean percent and weight. So every dot on here represents one pig from my load that went to market, and that truckload now, remember, is representing all of the pigs I send in a year. If we put all of them up there, it would just be black. So we're putting a representative sample up there. And what you see, of course, is there is a correlation between lean and weight here, but it's not perfectly correlated. And anybody who would take a look at their matrix from the packer would know that there is a intention to try to get most of those pigs in a range which doesn't have sort loss on it, or very much sort loss, and is relatively high lean, so it gets premiums. And you can kind of represent that by that the green circle that I have here, and you can really draw that circle however tight you want as a goal, or a little bit wider. Now, again, how do we choose the target weight? Most people choose it, I think, in reference to looking at previous kill sheets, and anything over about 270 on this farm seems to really get killed, and so that's where we're setting it. And yet, if I would look through them systematically, I would find many 270 loads with no sort loss and some with astronomical sort loss. So you see, it's not just the average weight that counts, it's what I'm sending to achieve that average weight. Or we do the single pig calculation. Now, what do I mean by the single pig calculation? What I mean is, instead of looking at a distribution, I say, all right, if I had one pig to market, what's its profit maximizing weight? what is the weight that I sell it at, which gains me the most profit? Number one, it really only depends on two things. The first is, what's the cost of adding an additional pound? In other words, if I'm in late finishing and I want to know when do I stop? When do I stop putting weight on my single pig? I first have to ask, what is the cost of putting one more pound on? And that's a function of the average daily, of the growth curve of the animal, how it's growing, and its feed intake. And we know its feed efficiency is going down, or getting worse, I should say, as it gets older. So it's eating more feed to generate one more pound. And we need to know the cost of the last finishing ration, because with that information and the cost, I can calculate what an additional pound costs me. Then the second thing I need to know is the matrix that I'm selling into. What is an additional pound going to be worth? So I say, all right, I can do this on an envelope. What is my cost of feed? What do I think my feed efficiency is? And what do we usually put down for that? The average feed efficiency of the closeout, right? Not the feed efficiency of the weight that I'm looking at, the average feed efficiency of my typical closeouts. But that aside, we say, put one more pound on, costs this, return greater than cost, I'll do it. Put one more on, and you do it until you've captured all the profit, then you stop. One more pound would not return its value. So here we have just a little picture of that, and the green line is the Packer matrix. I mean, they're kind of like Mayan temples, right? I mean, there's a range over a certain weight where there's no discount for sort, and then if you get too heavy, it begins to penalize you, and then heavier again, more penalty, and then if they're monsters, they really knock you down. Now, depending on your packer, those could be very different where those slides are. That's why this is kind of an individualized analysis. We know that cost of gain as the pig gets heavier for each pound starts to go up, up, up. And so here we have kind of graphically depicted, if I added one more pound, it would cost me this, but I would only get this from the packer, so that's too heavy. I back up, and this is my weight. That's all very good. That's all the single pig analysis. Now, what happens if I try to market my distribution at that weight, which I think is the fundamental error that many producers begin to make? Let's assume that we calculate this for the single pig, and it's 275 pounds. Is it the same for my distribution, or is it something different? Well, we can model this. And these are some of the models that I've created over the last couple of years trying to operationalize the concepts that John Dean has brought on variation. Basically, having data from the packer on what your distribution is that you're sending there, you know, what is the weight ranges and the fat and lean percents that you're sending, I can take that actual kill sheet information and put it into a growth curve that approximates your performance on your farm, your ADFI, average daily feed intake curve, and every pig is attached to the packer matrix. So we'll take 180 pigs, put them in the computer, and we'll attach every single one of them to its place on the ADFI curve, the growth curve, and the packer matrix. Now, you can imagine having the computer say, take all the pigs and advance a day. Depending on where this pig is right now, it's in a different place on the growth curve. The computer says, all right, it grows this amount. If they're bigger, it grows a different amount. How much feed do they eat is pulled off of this, and then they're simultaneously valued. So the computer can say, all right, we're going to add a day. How much does each pig grow? It'll be a different amount for each one. How much do they eat? What is their value? And then we can ask it to move that distribution around and settle on the weight for that distribution, which maximizes, for instance, the return over my feed cost in this particular way. So if we market your distribution now, which is indicated by this red distribution line here, if we try to market them with the average at the single pig optimum, what happens is this tail of heavyweight pigs is heavily discounted by the packer, and we wind up with a lot of losses. So in practice, the ideal weight for a distribution as long as it has some standard deviation, that is, it's not, every pig isn't the same size, is going to be lighter than the single pig optimum. You have to back the weight up. And the reason why you back it up is to take the penalty out of these pigs. Now, you don't keep backing it up. You got to be careful because these start to get penalized, right? So it lends itself very easily for a computer sort of simulation to place that distribution just at the right point where the gains that I'm making here by moving these pigs back, not just in the Packer matrix, but at cost of production too, because remember they're attached to the ADFI curve and to the growth curve. I want to move it back where the losses that I'm picking up here, that is I'm saving here or gaining here, aren't outweighed by this. So if I lower the distribution 1 more pound, the losses here would be greater than the savings here and across the whole distribution, and the computer solves for that. Now, what is typically that weight going to be? Well, we have to be a little bit careful because, it depends on your growth curve and so on. But if feed is, on average, about $260 a ton wean to finish, the base meat price is $73 a hundredweight in the carcass. Assume your yield is on average about 76.5. Your average lean about 55. And let's just further assume that anything below 210 or above 340 goes to parks or goes somewhere, and you basically get half the base price. This is what I threw in just for our work today. We can take a look at that. Here is a picture of the gross margin. That is, every single one of those dots now represents, if you will, the profit or the return above feed costs that each of these 180 pigs gained for me. So you see the couple that are real heavy didn't even recover their feed, or basically recovered their feed. If it was way too light and we cut the price in half, you're in a loss situation even on feed on that one too. But then we have an outcome up here of return over feed cost when we allow the distribution to be marketed at the single pig optimum of 275. Now what we're going to do is grab this distribution and move it to the place where the profits from all 180 pigs when added together are the greatest. And it turns out in this case with those feed prices that the optimal average weight for my distribution is about 262, which is a pretty dramatic difference from the 275 that the single pig result would give us. What this is saying is, if you're sending on the truck pigs which have this kind of spread in weights and so forth, and they each have a spread in cost, which we've accounted for, again, by hooking them to the ADFI and growth curve, and we've allowed the lean percents to change as we move them up and down according to the relationship that I've shown you over there. What it says is, you'll make the most money by lowering the weight, the average weight of the pigs that you market. Now remember, we're talking about the average weight that the farm markets, not the average weight on every single load. What's going to happen is if I sell, 5,000 loads in a year, what this is saying is, basically, we want all those loads to average 262. Ones that are more uniform will be heavier weights. Ones that are dump loads may be lighter weights. But the overall average, if I go to the end of the year and calculate what my marketing weight is, should be substantially lower. I've talked to producers who invest in pretty high-powered genetics, and many of them believe that their optimal selling weight, even today, is 310, 320. And what I'm suggesting to you is, and many of them believe it's 280, 290, with high-cost inputs in this high-cost input environment and the typical packing grids that we have, people are dramatically overestimating the average sale weight. Now here's the outcome from selling selling all those pigs at the single pig optimum weight and selling them at our 262. The first thing you notice is you get less revenue per head, right? Because you lowered the average weight that you're selling at. But what happens is you more than compensate for that in feed cost reduction. Because remember, you're moving those real heavy, less feed-efficient pigs back into a more feed-efficient zone. And the outcome is actually, $2 and something higher. So you make more money over feed costs with a lower average revenue per head because the feed savings to get you there are actually make up for the revenue loss. So if our initial weight of 275 is shifted down to our 262, we have a gross margin increase of about 236 a head. So now my question to you is, did we intend at the beginning, when we invested in this operation and so on, to sell this distribution? Was that our intention? To sell 275-pound average pigs that have a 25-pound standard deviation? Or really, was it something different than that? John Dean has a favorite example that he talks about with respect to quality when he asks this question. He says, what if you went to the Quick Trip out here and you bought a 6-pack of cans of Coke, and you brought it up to the counter and they said, well, normally it's $3, but we're only going to charge you $2.25 today because can number 1 over here is 70% full, and can number 2 is 85% full, and can number 6 over here is, about 90% full. But the rest of them are really good. They're all the way up to the top. Right? That's how we send our pigs, though, to market, isn't it? We don't send them all. Ideally, we send them all, some underproduced, some overproduced, some pretty close to what we intended. So, let's take a little look at what would happen to this distribution and the outcome and the profit maximizing weight if we took some kind of action to actually lower the standard deviation. That is, to produce pigs, even if we accounted for every one of them, the good, the bad, and the ugly, that at the end of the day resulted in a more narrow distribution of outweights to market. So this is our initial situation, 275 pounds, or actually we're at our this is our 275 pounds. And the gross margin here, the gain, we're set at 0 as kind of a baseline. If we were able to move that distribution in 15% and change nothing else, that is, still marketed them at 275 without doing the profit maximizing kind of thing, but simply move in the variation of what we sell, we could pick up about $1.76 a head. If we could move it in about 30%, there's $3.54 there. Now, you might want to ask, how difficult is it to change my distribution? How difficult is it to move it in 15% or even as high as 30%? Well, the jury is a little bit out on that, but I'm going to go through a list here in conclusion of things that I believe add to this problem. And it's where research is now beginning. But let me tell you one example that you'll all be very aware of that we've changed in this industry, which is really the hallmark of the beginning of this change. When we started putting in concrete and brought sows indoors and gestation buildings and so on, the idea was, and it's a very wrong idea, but the idea was, well, I'm looking at my sow herd now on a separate site away from nursery and finishing, and I ask myself, what is the most expensive piece of equipment in the farrowing house? Well, it's the farrowing crate, right? So if I really want to save money and make a really efficient, low-cost pig, I want to get as many pigs as possible through that crate in a year, right? It's pigs out the door that matter. And we stimulated people to do that with bonus structures and so on. So as long as you're hitting your farrowing rate target, and as long as you're got your group size right, what is the only way to get more pigs through the crate in a year? lower the lactation length, right? We got to rip them off the sow at 14, 15 days and get the next sow in, right? Now, that all sounded like a great idea because when segregated early weaning first became popular, it was popularized as a disease-breaking strategy. That is, if we could get the pigs nursed off of the sow while they still were under the colostral immunities and move them to a different site, we had a lot less disease problems. The problem that we've discovered, though, in doing that, if 20 was good, 17 was better, 14-day weanings were even better than that, and the industry came down to an average of 15, 16-day lactation lengths. Now, I've got contracts, dusty ones back in my file, of wean pig purchase contracts that actually accept down to a 6-pound pig at weaning from the early 1990s. Because people were weaning, average of 14 days. And remember, 14, 15 days. Remember, if the average weaning age is at 15 days, an average, remember, means that they're a lot below the average as well as above. And we often found contract sow producers, when it came time to get close to their bonus determination, and they weren't quite there, the last couple of weanings, if they shoved them down, a couple of days, and sped things up and moved the pigs out in this period, before you went over the borderline into the next, they could make their bonus. Well, the problem that emerged from that showed up where? From that early weaning. In the finishing, right? What we had was a lot of what, again, John Dean calls attrition. The pigs were damaged early in their life, and that damage showed up in the late nursery and in the finishing phase when we had more variance and poor-doing pigs. And because they were at a different site and it was 3 or 4 months later, it took a long time for people to go, whoa, this isn't really a finishing problem. This is a wean age problem. So now the industry spent millions and millions of dollars putting in more crates, raising it up to 21, 22, 23 days in order to solve that problem. And that is exactly what we're talking about here, a strategy that sent variation and low-outcome pigs into the final distribution for marketing. Now, I can tell you from one of the larger farms that I work at where I have intensive access to data that in this farm at least, and I think on many farms, rigorously educating around the marketing issue and getting everybody tightly following standard operating procedures and giving them weekly feedback about the pigs that are being sold, the sort losses being generated, and the distributions that are being sold, I believe many farms can reduce the standard deviation 15 to 30% without spending anything. Simply with educating people and reestablishing the the standard operating procedures and reinforcing good behavior there. Then there are decisions we make in low profit times like, I'm going to take this vaccination out. Because gee whiz, we haven't really had that problem here for a while in my area. Remember how every expense is attached to a revenue at some point? I think what we got to begin looking at is what are the things which create this variation, because what they do is result in my average weights having to be lower. So by virtue of simply leaving the distribution unchanged but choosing the profit optimal weight for that distribution, we can gain 236 just by moving that distribution down to a new average targeted marketing weight. But what if we reduce the standard deviation by 30% and then choose the new profit maximizing, weight? What happens is, though I had to reduce to 262 because of this rather wide distribution, by taking action to narrow the variance of what I send to market, and by the way, it all can't be done with a paint stick. Some of it can if that's being done sloppy. but intervention early in the life of the pig seems to be very key at stopping this this beginning of the widespread or wider spread of growth rates and disease. Certainly, both respiratory and enteric disease add to that spreading. So by virtue of choosing, I can choose the optimal weight here now with my existing distribution of 262, but taking action to narrow the variance means that I can move it now up to a new profit optimized 267 pounds. And what you can imagine is, if I were able to completely eliminate all variation, which of course we can't, but if I could collapse that down to a single line, I would move it up to 275, the single pig solution. So everything, even when I calculate it from a profit optimizing situation, by being forced to choose a lower marketing weight, I have opportunity left on the table. As I decrease variation, I can capture some of that back. Now, the reason why this is a powerful technique and a powerful thing to do on the farm is it's kind of got a three-bang impact to your bottom line. Number one is from the 262, by lowering my variance, and if I can do that by just education, for instance, to start with, I get more throughput, right? I go from 262 to 267 at the profit optimized place. Those pigs are sold at a higher price. Why? Because when I bring the distribution in, the tails, which are the ones that get snagged in the sort loss matrix, don't get snagged as fast or as many, and the cost of production goes down per hundredweight because those low value pigs that are around eating maintenance all the time but not growing are raising the cost of production. So more output, higher price, less cost of production. That is why we get this kind of impact. And you're never going to get that kind of impact from taking everybody's cell phone away or forcing everybody to walk or drive or whatever when they should fly. So here's our optimized distribution. The gross margin gain from the original distribution by bringing it in 30%, marketing it the new optimal 267, picking up 485 a head in the process. So here are the things that people like Mike Brum and others are beginning to take a look at in terms of their impact on variation. Is doubling and tripling, stocking wean to finish barns sort of the new low lactation length strategy? I think it could very well be. But remember, producers never found an empty space that they could fall in love with. So the wean to finish building has to be filled at the very beginning and essentially destroying most of the advantages of what we started wean to finish for, right? Put them in one place, don't move them, let them live their whole life. You don't have to remix them. They grow 10 days faster to market. What if we're stocking them in there, yanking them out at different times, remixing them? Have we, in fact, done the same thing for the same wrong reason? Which is, I hear veterinarians, for instance, quoting me and saying, well, that triple stocking saves me $3 a head. I can show you how it saves me $3 a head. Well, it's the same thing that pigs over concrete or pigs over farrowing crates. None of that has dollars in it, and none of it has profit in it. They're all physical kinds of calculations that you make. Weaning weight, choosing the right weaning weight to lower variation, co-mingling flows, vaccinations or lack of vaccinations. We're all trying to find alternate feed ingredients, but is it really just the nutritional content of Oreo cookies or whatever cat food I'm using? Is that the only thing that really happens when I feed that? Or does it change fundamentally the shape of the distribution that I'm marketing? Growth promotants, how much finishing space we give, water feeder design, so on. Even contract production. I saw in one of the magazines recently that because in a typical wean to finish barn, 2,400 head wean to finish deep pit, the value of the manure in a year as a fertilizer replacement is close to $65,000. You got corn producers saying, I don't care nothing about the pigs, I want the manure. I'll put a building up for you. Now, Tim Lula tells a story that's interesting. Probably many of you know him or heard of him with Swine Vet Center in southern Minnesota. They have an experimental feeding building that they do tests in and so on, a finishing building. And he gets his contract growers together, and they look at the results in that building compared to their results, the individual contract growers' results. And of course, in the building where experiments are going on, they're much better. And he had a grower look at that one time and raise his hand and said, well, of course your outcomes are better there. They're intensively managed. Right? Well, we used to have this idea in the industry that, well, with $1.50 corn, maybe it makes sense. You find a really smart person if they're going to do a sow contract. You find a very maternal type person, detail-oriented, to do a nursery contract. But any dumbass can do a finishing contract. Right? Now, if you're a contract finisher, I don't mean, there are a lot of really good contract finishers. But if somebody is in the most feed-intensive, longest phase of production where variance could really get accentuated, and all they really wanted was the manure, so occasionally they're dropping by and they're doing the bare minimum and all that kind of stuff, is our contract system spinning variation into our outcomes and resulting in these losses? Building design and ventilation and so on. So, my last slide. Feels so good in here, cool, even though I'm spewing hot air. I may have to go a couple more minutes. No. All right, let's look at it just as kind of an idealized situation. 217 pigs came into our care, right? Born alive. 180 got sold. Now, again, ideal, 217. Say we sold 217. The minimum weight in our distribution was 197, the maximum 346. What if they all went out at the profit maximizing weight for the single pig? Average gross margin 64.94, average gross margin 78.14, total gross margin on our load of pigs 11.689, perfect 16.957. Now I only show that because we know we can't get all that or really even close to it, but in every load going to market, at these costs and at these packer values, we got $5,200 on the table. $29 in gross margin. I just showed you with a 30% reduction in standard deviation and then optimizing the market weight, we picked up $5. You know, that's very good, right? Wouldn't you like to have $5 more a head? Really almost without spending anything by paying real close attention to what you're doing. Of course, we can't get all that, but I like to show it anyway because of magnetic north. That's how I like to explain it. Somewhere in Canada, I think, is magnetic north, but there really isn't an airport there as far as I know. You can't buy a ticket to the magnetic north. But every time I get into a plane and it lifts off the runway, I'm guided to where I'm going by reference to magnetic north. So even though the ideal, there might not be a landing strip for you at 5,268, use that as a reference, maybe you can get that $4 a head. Cool? You like the idea? Let's all reduce our variation. We'll all be happy.